Today's guest is Professor Russell Foster, the Oxford neuroscientist who discovered how light sets the body clock and now directs the university's Sleep and Circadian Neuroscience Institute. If you're living on 3 a.m. emails, airport lounges, and a sleep is for wimps mindset, this conversation is your reset. Over the next hour, you'll learn why late-night emails, marathon workdays, and constant screens drain focus and drive burnout. Then Professor Foster shares simple, science-backed tips you can start this week to sleep deeper, think clearer, and stay resilient.
Russell, welcome to the Charlotte Giselle Show. I'm so happy to have you here. Just looking at you and talking to you today, I feel like I'm going to have a good night's sleep tonight. That's how strongly I feel about your work. That's it. It's like having a mini sleeping lab all around me. I'm going to grab my pillow.
Well, I'm delighted to join you today. I really am. Yeah.
Surprise, surprise. Today we are going to talk about sleep, one of my favorite topics. And I want to make a bit of a confession at the right start of this recording. The reason it is one of my favorite topic in the world is because I struggled so much. And I think this is quite common. We now live in a world where sleep is becoming almost like something to avoid, something to sacrifice, the first thing that goes. And when I talk to all my clients, be it attorneys, lawyers, traders, I'm too busy, I'll sleep when I'm dead, right?
Yeah,
this is the new sleep trend. What are your thoughts on this statement?
Oh, well, it's not that new. I mean, those of us that remember the 80s, and I'm sure you don't, people would come into work and say, oh, I did another all-nighter. And they'd be, slapped on the back, say, oh, well done. And at that point, the appreciation of the importance of sleep wasn't clear, and it was regarded very much as an indulgence, a luxury. Sleep has been thought of almost as an illness that needs a cure. So I think parts of society have changed, but not all. And I think in the corporate business world, it's still pretty much embedded that sleep is for wimps. And I think what we need to establish is that if you want to do a first-class job, be a first-class colleague, and make important and reflective decisions, then you need to embrace sleep, because this is the superpower that will allow you to make the best of your both your personal life and your professional life.
And could you tell us a little bit more about what drew you to the field of neuroscience and the neuroscience of sleep specifically? Because I know that you've got decades and decades of experience working.
You make me sound terribly old, and of course
Oh,
I am.
Quite the opposite. I wanted to say that you are an absolute expert on the topic. Where does this passion come from?
Well, before I went to university, I thought I'd become a marine biologist because I was a swimmer, and I love biology. I love swimming. You become a marine biologist, and then I went to university and studied zoology, and then realized that actually what really excited me is physiology, understanding the mechanisms that underpin behavior, our biology in general. And was fascinated by light and how light interacts with biological systems, but not just vision, but also how it regulates our sleep-wake cycle, our circadian cycle, and so much more. And so really I got into circadian and sleep biology because of a fascination with light. And of course, a big strand of my research has been trying to understand how light regulates biological time. And so that's the sort of way in. But it was only, I suppose, 25 years ago when I started working on humans. It was mainly animal models, like mice, and also some very curious animals as well, which we may get into. But it was really trying to understand why sleep-wake disruption was so severe in mental illness. And so this other strand started to develop, and really has come to almost dominate a lot of the stuff that we do in Oxford.
And I really am fascinated by all your research around the connection between mental health, or rather the lack of mental health, and sleep, or rather the lack of sleep. And specifically, one thing that I really have been wanting to ask you for so long is, what is your take on the connection between burnout and sleep? Is it a bit of a chicken and egg situation?
No, I think So this started because I was in an elevator lift with a psychiatrist, and he turned to me and said, "Oh, you work on sleep, don't you?" And I said, "Well, kind of." And he said, "Well, my patients with with schizophrenia, they don't have a job, so they go to bed late, get up late, miss my clinic, and don't have friends." And I thought that was one of the most stupid things I'd ever heard. So we worked with another psychiatrist, and we studied her patients with schizophrenia and discovered that there weren't just bad rhythms, they were absolutely smashed. It's one of those pivot points in one's career when you see for the first time objective, quantitative measures of sleep are just dreadful, awful. And so with that knowledge and also my mechanistic background, understanding the fundamental mechanisms of sleep and circadian rhythms, I came up with a conceptual model, which is very straightforward, which is at the heart of the relationship between sleep, circadian rhythms on one side and mental illness on the other. There are a group of overlapping pathways and mechanisms. So the sleep-wake system draws upon all the key neurotransmitters in the brain. So if there's a change in one neurotransmitter, let's say dopamine, that predisposes you to a mental health issue, then it's going to have an impact upon sleep. And so at the core, there's this overlap. And so we tested that hypothesis by taking mice and using a gene which has been linked to human schizophrenia. We changed that gene, mutated that gene in a mouse. And what was extraordinary is that the sleep-wake patterns of the mouse fell apart. And it was studies like that showing that there is genuinely a mechanistic overlap at the core. But that's not all. So because, and we'll get into this, sleep and circadian rhythm disruption has a big impact upon our emotional responses, our cognitive responses, and our overall physiology. This can make the psychiatric condition worse. And of course, the psychiatric condition can then feed back and make the sleep and circadian rhythm disruption worse. So you have that predisposition at the core, but then because of the sleep disruption, you can move rapidly into a much more severe state because of that loop. And so what we reasoned is, okay, well, if we can stabilize or even partially stabilize sleep in individuals with mental health conditions, can we reduce the severity of the symptoms? And so working with Dan Freeman in psychiatry here in Oxford, we looked at a group of individuals who had insomnia, but also were showing paranoia and hallucinatory experiences. So they were on the psychosis spectrum. And what we were able to show is that even partial stabilization of the insomnia resulted in a very marked reduction in their levels of paranoia and hallucinatory experiences. So by just stabilizing sleep alone, you could have a big impact upon the severity of the mental health. And that's now entered into sort of the psychiatric realm, and now sleep is taken very seriously in psychiatry, but by many, not all. And of course, it's interesting because if you look at the history of this, way back in the 1880s, Kraepelin, the father of psychiatry, basically was talking about this relationship between mental illness and sleep disruption. But it was dismissed, when in the 1960s, when the antipsychotics sort of started to arrive, it was, oh, well, the poor sleep is just a byproduct of the antipsychotics. And it was simply dismissed and not paid attention to. Now it's regarded as a feature of the illness, and what's more, a potential therapeutic target. And that's what's so exciting for me, because I'm, come from a fundamental basic science background, but a knowledge of this basic science has informed the way we think about the relationships between mental illness and sleep disruption, and can provide some sort of approach to reducing the severity of psychiatric symptoms. So now it's taken very seriously by sectors across psychiatry, and it's, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it's been great working with my friends in this field to try and advise and help in this domain.
Thank you so much for your insight on that. One topic that I really wanted to address with you is this almost compulsive requirement now that we see at a societal level to want something to sedate us at night,
Yeah,
to put us down because our
yeah,
mind is so wired,
yeah,
right? We can't switch off all these voices that we have in our head. And then, of course, in the morning, we want stimulants, right? So
yeah,
the more we get things to sedate us, be it the sleeping pills, the alcohol, the wine, the Netflix, the series, the binging on ice creams and otherwise,
yeah,
the more we need the stimulants in the morning. So that will be your caffeine, your Red Bulls,
yeah,
your cigarettes, your vaping, you name it,
yeah.
right? So we're hijacked at night, we're hijacked in the morning. And of course, we know where that goes into this very vicious cycle. How can we break this cycle?
Well, it's an incredibly important point, and I think there's several things one can unpack there. In that, and this I think is very much in your domain, in that most people don't have a sleep issue, a sleep problem. They have an anxiety or a stress issue, and this is sort of overriding the biological, you know, drive for sleep. And so, as you rightly point out, you get into this stimulant sedative feedback loop. So the waking day is fueled by caffeinated drinks, for example. Caffeine can last in the system for 5, 8, 9 hours, depending upon who you are. So you come around to nighttime when you think, oh my goodness, I've got to get some sleep. And then you take sedatives, such as alcohol or sleeping tablets. And the key point here is that these are sedatives. They don't provide a biological mimic for sleep. So alcohol is particularly good at preventing us laying down memory and processing information. So it can be very disruptive on our deep sleep, which is where we do a lot of a lot of brain processing. And so then, as you rightly point out, you're forced out of bed in the morning by the alarm clock, and then you need to drive the waking day with more stimulants. And of course, that can lurch into the use of a range of banned substances, of course, that act as stimulants. So it's really important to break that loop. First of all, by recognizing what you're doing. And I think most of us don't realize that that's how we're living our life, with this sort of stimulants reversed by sedatives. So being aware that that's what's going on, and then finding ways in which you can reduce that stress and that anxiety, and make the time to do that. And whether that be going to the gym towards the end of the day, whether it be mindfulness, whether it be yoga, whether it be listening to your favorite piece of Wagner, whatever it is, you've got to identify that de-stressor and then use it on a regular basis, and not think, oh, well, I can just, I can use sedatives, because that is not how you're going to optimize your ability to function during the day.
You know, you're one of the first person that ever taught me the importance of rethinking my toothbrushing strategy. When I watched your TED talk all those years ago,
Gosh, a long
I
time
love
ago now. Yeah,
well, I love the point that, those things that we do right before bed are
yeah,
not the best. Like you
no,
go into this bathroom with blue fluorescent lighting and you brush your teeth under this
yeah,
spotlight. The reason I point this out is because this is such a common, seems like quite a normal behavior. But
yeah,
I love the fact that you pointed it out. And now I'm the weird one in hotel bathroom where I can't control the light, but I have my blue blocking glasses when I brush my teeth. It's a bit of an acquired look, but that's the way I do it. I would love for you to point out some of those common behavior that
yeah.
we engage in and day out, and we don't realize those are not good sleep rituals.
Yeah, we should come back to blue light and all the rest of it, but in a moment. But you're right. I mean, what's the most brightly lit room in the house? In the bathroom, and it's the bathroom mirror. And what we do know is that high levels of light will increase light levels of alertness and delay sleep onset. So yes, I actually have, and you can buy these, a bathroom mirror which dims. And so you can actually control, so I have enough light to see cleaning my teeth, and identify some sort of strange image of myself. But that's all you need. You don't need bright light. But But I think while we're on the topic of light, we should just unpack this a bit more. So there is this myth about blue light. Now, and that if you look at a computer screen or if you look at a Kindle before you go to bed, you can disrupt your sleep. Now, that's embedded in, accepted wisdom, but in fact, it's wrong. So if we just look at that study that was on the Kindle, individuals were kept under dim light in the lab, and then were exposed to 4 hours of Kindle light on its maximum setting immediately before bedtime. And that happened on 5 consecutive nights. And at the end of that time, sleep onset was delayed just statistically by 9 minutes. So the effect on delaying sleep was very small and barely significant. And then remember, during the day, these people were kept under dim light. A Scandinavian team then repeated the experiments essentially, but gave people moderate levels of light for 6 hours during the day. And the effects were completely abolished. There was no effect whatsoever. So the key point is that if you're seeing reasonable amounts of light during the day, you're desensitizing your clock to light in the evening. Now, if you're inside all day and it's dim light, then you will be more sensitive to televisions, to Kindles, and all the rest of it in the evening. So that's why it's important to get out during the day and get exposure to moderate levels of light if you possibly can. And in fact, even if you can't get outside, but sitting close to a window, you'll probably get the levels of light that you need to desensitize the clock in the evening. So it's quite complicated. Blue light seems to be the most effective at stimulating those photoreceptors we discovered in the eye, those photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. And certainly blue light is the most effective at shifting the biological clock, and indeed our alerting systems. But if the light is bright enough, it doesn't matter what the color is. And so I think we need to be a bit careful. Bright white light is going to be as effective as, more or less, as effective as bright blue light. So I should think we should stop obsessing about the color. And so, for example, Efflux and these programs which shift a smartphone or a computer screen from blue enriched to red enriched, there is absolutely no evidence that shift has any effect at all on our circadian rhythms. So whilst I think it's sensible to keep lights relatively low in the evening before bed, I don't think we should get too worried about it. So if your way of relaxing in the evening is to read your Kindle, that's fine. Don't worry about it. If you're going to read your Kindle, then it might be smart to get out during the day for a bit of white light, sunlight exposure to desensitize the clock in the evening. But yeah, we've got to start unpacking some of these myths. And I know lots of people, after public talks have come up to me and said, my Kindle is the way I relax and wind down in the evening. Now I'm told I can't use it. That's not the case. It's an artifact of the way the experiments were done.
Would you say something different if the proposition was not to use Kindle, but was to scroll on socials in bed with the phone right next to the nose?
Yeah, Charlene, that is the key point, because
right.
whilst it's not the light that is causing the problems, it is the alerting effect that your emails, your social media, and all the rest of it are having. And some very important studies have been done on adolescents showing that they are perfectly well aware that doing social media until the early hours of the morning is a bad thing. They're kind of hooked on it, and the concern, the fear even of being disconnected from one's social group is so overwhelming that these kids, use their social media until the early hours of the morning. Just a wonderful story. I remember talking to one young lad, and I was saying about using devices before you go to bed. He said, "Oh, let me stop you there." This is, of course, a 17-year-old. Let me just stop you there, Professor, because I have one of these devices where I can go from blue enriched to red enriched screen, so I don't have to worry about that sort of thing delaying my clock. And I said, well, the evidence for that is there isn't any, but okay, let's just say, what time do you actually go to sleep? And he said, well, about 2 o'clock in the morning. so he's kind of fooling himself. He's not being affected because he's got this screen shift thing on. But of course he is, by obsessing about social media. And that's, I think, a really important thing to stress for all of us. I mean, when I first had a BlackBerry, I flew. This tells you how long ago it was. I was working in Australia, and so I would get the Australian emails coming through, and then the European ones, and then the North American ones. And of course, I had jet lag. And first of all, I had this BlackBerry, by the bed, and you could see the little red light glowing with the new, thing. And so I then put it in the next room. In the end, I left it in the lab overnight because I was so hooked on the stuff that was coming through. And it's very important to find ways in which you can just turn off from these devices. Great problem, of course, is that many bedrooms now, because of working from home, have become also offices. And so in the place where you should be most relaxed and you can embrace sleep, you're surrounded by the devices that drive the working day, and then shutting off from that is incredibly difficult. So, and I appreciate it's incredibly difficult, but if you can possibly get that stuff out of the sleeping space, put it on a trolley, move it away so it's not there lurking and reminding you of the pressure of work.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And you mentioned the word jet lag, and that's really something I want to spend a little bit of time with you talking about, because in my line of work, jet lag is a bit of a side effect to what we do and the way we operate. In fact, most of my clients are self-described as high billers, high flyers, and they live in lounges and they're constantly on 2-3 time zones, global businesses, global teams. And jet lag has become a bit of a status symbol. Like, the more jet lagged you are, the more points you have with British Airways, and the biggest your status in a way.
I've just flown back from Istanbul, and my flight was cancelled. So I had an extra 24 hours in various lounges and places. Yeah, it's only a short. There's very little jet lag involved with Istanbul, but boy, you could see the long haul passengers who were just crumpled in a heap in the corner of the lounge. Poor things.
From a neuroscientific standpoint, is jet lag real? And how can we combat jet lag so that we can buffer our sleep?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So if we think about the circadian system, the body clock, it's this internal representation of a day. And what it gives us is a time structure for our biology. If you think about it, our biology delivers the right stuff at the right concentration to the right tissues and organs at the right time of day. And this allows us to adapt to the hugely different demands of sleep and wake. So it provides this structure. Now, this internal clock is usually a little bit longer than 24 hours. So if we went to a deep dark cave, constant light, constant temperature, we would get up a little bit later and later and later each day. So under normal circumstances, we're exposed to a light dark cycle, and that forces our internal clock to be the same as the external world. And that, of course, gives it adaptive value. It's no point in having a clock to do the right stuff at the right time if it's completely desynchronized with local time. And that's, of course, what jet lag is. Essentially, you're flying across multiple time zones, and let's say London to Sydney, it's 12 hours apart. So in London, you'd be getting up, whereas in Sydney, you'd be going to bed. And so our metabolism and every other part of our biology is completely mismatched. How do you get over jet lag? Well, ultimately, it's exposure to light and also eating at the local meal times. That will help. It's a little bit complicated because if you're flying, let's say, from London to New York, then what you need to do to get over the jet lag is to get outside, get the light. You're adapting to an expanding day effectively. If you're flying from London to multiple time zones east, it's more complicated. And I won't go into the biology, but essentially, for the first few days, do not get exposed to morning light in the new time zone, but actively seek out afternoon light. And that will adapt you faster when traveling east. So traveling west, get out there, expose yourself to light. Traveling east, avoid morning light for the first several days. Seek out afternoon light. So that's how you could use light helpfully. Some people use melatonin. Excuse me. Melatonin is another one of those areas where we should clarify. It is not a sleep hormone. It is a mild modulator of sleep. So if you take melatonin, it can reduce the time it takes you to get to sleep under normal circumstances by 10, 20 minutes in some people, but not all. And there are studies which have shown that you can speed up the rate in which you can lock onto the local time zone by taking melatonin at local bedtime. But it's not a big effect. We're talking 10, 15 minutes or so. So it's not huge. My advice, in fact, would not be to take melatonin because of some potential side effects. There's a paper just published suggesting that if you're taking melatonin a lot, you can alter your gut bacteria, and that can be disruptive in lots of other ways. I think just use behavioral change. Now, this is an area of shifting the clock where we're doing quite a bit of research. And we've worked with people who have lost their eyes, Blind Veterans UK, so individuals who, as a result of trauma, have no eyes. And if you don't have eyes, you can't detect the light-dark cycle to set the clock. So these individuals are drifting through time. And what's fascinating, when you talk to people who've lost their eyes, they say, look, I can deal with not being able to see my world. But what I find the most frustrating is being tricked by my body about what time it is. And I heard a very poignant story by one individual who said, you know, and these individuals, particularly from a military background, are very self-reliant, very determined to try and have as normal life as possible. So this chap did not want the messy front yard. So he'd worked a way of getting out the lawnmower from the shed and how to use, you know, buffers. And so he could cut the lawn. Completely blind, but he was determined, you know, not to have the messy front yard. And he was in the process of doing this, and his wife came down and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "It's 3 a.m. in the morning. You're waking up the neighbors." And it's a really good example of where, you know, if you don't have your synchronization, you know, your clock is drifting. So what are we doing about that? Well, we talked about these special photoreceptors, these special light sensors in the eye, completely different from the rods and cones. We discovered these cells, and we now know how they interact with the master clock, the biological clock in the brain. And what we've got is a bunch of drugs which we've developed, which fool the biological clock at seen light. So what we hope to do is use those drugs to give back a sense of biological time to the profoundly blind. Now, of course, they will also have a role in severe mental illness to try and stabilize the clock. They'll have a role also in things like dementia and Alzheimer's, where the biological clock is also massively disrupted. And of course, in neurodevelopmental conditions where young children have very disrupted cycles. So we think there's, you know, where you can't use behavioral change, we could hopefully use one of these drugs. And so we're now gearing up to do the first clinical trials. We've done all the preclinical work and we know the drug is safe. So it's an exciting time. However, coming back to jet lag, they could be very powerful in jet lag. So if you are in the business sector and you've got to fly to, I don't know, Tokyo or Australia, wherever, and function, then you could take this drug and it will adapt and shift your clock very quickly so that you will be able to do the right thing at the right time. Now, I think I would only stress using this where you have to under exceptional circumstances, but it will, I think, allow us to get rid of, jet lag. I mean, it works perfectly well in mice, and now we need to show that it'll work brilliantly in humans too. So we're all set up to try and do that.
Fascinating. So it's not already...
It's not available, no. We've got actually FDA approval for orphan drug status, which is really good. And that's based on the preclinical work and the clinical work we've done with our friends in Monash University, showing that it's safe. And now we're trying to get the funding to do the full-blown clinical trials. It's a really exciting time. And it's another illustration where, again, fundamental curiosity-driven research, how is the body clock regulated by light, is going to lead to, I think, transformational new drugs.
That sounds like something really worth exploring, and I'm quite excited to know what happens once this clinical trials gets approved. It's a very exciting time. I was wondering if we could take a moment to talk a little bit about the sort of sometimes paradox or contradiction between some advice around let's use less digital devices, less screen, and then right the following second, but please track your sleep with an Oura ring and a Lily watch and a Garmin and an Apple and have this and have that. And even as far as putting those, little headbands where you can check the brain waves and do all those techs and gadgets to quote unquote help our sleep. Yeah, a few minutes ago, we just told everybody that we should stop using devices. So where do you stand? Are you pro gadgets, trackers, auras, Garmin? Again, I'm being brand agnostic, but just thinking about all of that.
I am very, verily anti these devices for a number of reasons. One is that they are, in many cases, deeply inaccurate. And you will see, this has been clinically tested. Well, you look at the papers and they've taken sort of 5 California undergraduates, stuck them in the lab for a day, and they've tested it against electroencephalography, EEG defined sleep, and it's kind of worked a bit, but in most cases they do not track sleep accurately. Now, what they could be useful for is telling you when you woke up and when you went to sleep. But trying to extract REM sleep, non-REM sleep, whether you had a good night of sleep and all the rest of it, is at the moment not possible. It will come, and these trackers will be useful. But in a sense, well, I suppose that the thing is that, okay, so you got this information, how are you going to use it? In some sense, it could be useful. I mean, if you want to lose weight, you weigh yourself in the morning, and you change, and you see that you've dropped to a lower weight. And that's because you've changed your eating habits. And so changing eating habits, can be reinforced by seeing that you've lost weight, and you've got that sort of virtuous circle. And in a sense, sleep trackers could be useful for that. You change your behavior, you go to bed earlier, you get longer sleep, for example. But that's invariably not how they're being used. And so I had somebody come up to me a couple of years ago saying, Professor Foster, I don't get 8 hours of sleep according to my tracker. Am I going to die? And I can say, well, I can tell you in all honesty, you're going to die. But it may have nothing to do with the information you're getting from your device. And so I think that they're fine for a bit of fun, but don't take them too seriously. They just aren't there yet. And the funding model is quite interesting, because you find that people get anxious about their sleep. They buy a tracker, they look at the data that's coming out, and invariably it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fit with their perception of their sleep or their feelings of tiredness. And after 6 months, it's in the drawer. And so the devices aren't there yet. And okay, let's say if they were accurate, what does that information then allow you to do? They're not linked with sleep hygiene and sleep health. And so there are digital things like Sleepio, for example, which can allow you to improve your sleep, but they're not currently linked to trackers. So a couple of points: trackers aren't accurate, and even if you do get accurate devices, what do you do about it? There's no feedback to digital cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So my advice is you don't use them. Not yet. They will get better. And in fact, I think they're part of the problem that we face at the moment of sleep anxiety. They're making us more anxious, whereas we really don't need this sort of extra layer of information, misleading information about our sleep. If we're already anxious about our sleep, this invariably will make it worse.
I really want to talk about this because, and I speak here from a place of personal experience, and perhaps I can also share how I overcame it, but I still come across it almost on a daily basis from my clients, is that performance night anxiety, where you have a board meeting, or you have to go to court, or you have to have a difficult meeting with your boss, or you have to perform in one way or another, and intellectually that you should go to bed, but of course it's now 1 a.m. and all you're doing is worrying about the fact that you need to perform and you need to be on stage, and now you're worried about not sleeping, and you're just going into this loop. I think we've all been there. I certainly have
absolutely.
been there for
I've
years.
been there too, yes.
Can you tell us from a neuroscientific standpoint, A, what is going on in that brain in that moment, and B, how can we safely and holistically interrupt this loop?
Yeah, and we touched on this a little bit before, but let's look at some of the emotional and cognitive responses that decline really quite quickly after not getting the sleep that we need. So we see that we experience fluctuations in mood, we're more irritable, we have higher levels of anxiety, we have loss of empathy, we fail to pick up the social signals from friends, colleagues, members of the family. We have frustration, increased levels of frustration, and a very important one is risk-taking and impulsivity. We do stupid and unreflective things when we're tired. Another very important area is what's called a negative salience. So the tired brain, I think this is so important, the tired brain remembers negative experiences but forgets the positive ones. So one's whole worldview is biased by that sort of weight of negativity that you've remembered and forgotten the good stuff. We've touched on the fact that you're much more likely to use stimulants and then sedatives to reverse it. So those are some of the emotional things that are going on. But cognitive responses, our ability overall to process information, is lowered. Our ability to multitask, I think this is very important, because normally we're bombarded with information and we're able to extract what is important and ignore all the noise in the background. And that capacity is impaired with a tired brain. Memory consolidation, information processing. There's data now is so clear that a night of sleep hugely enhances our ability to come up with novel solutions to complex problems. That's been shown beautifully in the lab. Concentration, communication, decision-making, creativity are all affected by poor sleep. So, okay, that's what we get from sleep. And if you're going to perform the next day, that's why you need to prioritize sleep. And so, if you've got a board meeting where you have to, multitask, where you have to communicate, whether you're, thinking on your feet, sleep will absolutely enhance that ability. Okay, how do we get that sleep? And And it's complicated, but I think the thing to remember is that most people feel that sleep is what you get and there's not a huge amount you can do about it. But if you prioritize your sleep, then there's lots you can do to get the sleep that you need. And I should absolutely stress that sleep is like shoe size. One size does not fit all. And so the sergeant major's screaming, "You must get 8 hours," that's an average. And it is emphatically wrong to impose that average on everybody. And so healthy sleep is between about 6 hours and 10 and a half, even 11 hours, depending on how old you are. So there's a huge range. And what we all have to do is define what our current sleep needs are. So in its kind of simple advice, it's the sort of thing our grandparents probably would have told us, which is, do you feel that you can perform at your peak during the day? If you can, you're probably getting the sleep you need, and you should stop worrying about it. Do you oversleep extensively on free days, like at the weekend? Do you depend upon an alarm clock or somebody else to get you out of bed? Does it take you a long time to wake up? Do you have this sort of sleep grogginess or sleep inertia? Do you feel sleepy, irritable, fatigued when you are awake? Do you crave a nap during the day? Do you crave caffeinated and sugar-rich drinks? And have your friends, colleagues, family mentioned you seem a bit more irritable, you don't quite have the empathy that you used to have, and you're more disinhibited? This is telling you, all of it, that you're not getting the sleep you need. So that's the first thing you need to do. How much sleep do I need? Then you can ask yourself those questions. What to do about it? Well, there's loads. So during the day, before bed, the bedroom, and in bed. Just a few tips. So during the day, try and get that morning light exposure, because that sets the body clock and the sleep-wake cycle. If you feel you have to nap, make sure it's no longer than 20 minutes and it's not close to bedtime, because that will push back the need for sleep and make it more difficult to get to sleep that night. Exercise, great way of burning off that stress hormones, but again, not too close to bedtime, because it can increase core body temperature and that can delay getting off to sleep. Obviously, avoid caffeine-rich drinks. I would stop drinking them by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the key point for me is always stepping back at the end of the day, making time to wind down. And whatever, as we've touched on, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's yoga, whatever, but that's the kind of stuff you need to do to during the day and before bed. Before bed, try and get rid of those electronic devices at least 30 minutes, and turn off the phones and all the rest of it. We've talked about, ideally, don't use prescription drugs. Now, certainly, short-term use of these drugs, 5-7 days, is what your general practitioner will usually prescribe, can be useful to resetting, but don't become dependent upon them. In the same way, don't use alcohol or antihistamines. One of the things that is slightly ironic is that for many couples, they're so busy, they don't have time to talk to each other. And so you're finally lying in bed at the end of the day, and there's all these pressing family or matters that, family finances, whatever it is. And this is emphatically not the time you discuss those things. In our household, family finances are banned from the bedroom, and anything stressful. So that you have to make time for those discussions much earlier in the day.
I think when my husband listens to you saying that, he will play this on repeat to me many and many and many times again.
I mean, we all do it, or we used
I'm
to do
very
it.
good at that.
Yeah, because that's the only time. But actually, you need to have a time when you actually timetable the stressful discussions, not lying in bed last thing at night.
Just get up, get out of bed. Let's walk through this, darling.
but not in the bedroom or before bed.
Love it.
Make sure the bedroom isn't too warm. Part of the sleep initiation is a drop in core body temperature. And if the bedroom is too warm, that can be a problem. And of course, this is why people find it difficult to sleep, on the hot summer nights. Interestingly, there's a male-female difference. Women can tolerate a warmer bedroom than men. And there are different, and there's actually very interesting differences. I remember talking about this when I visited the mining community up in northwest Australia. Absolutely amazing, the Pilbara area. And one lady said to me, "Oh yeah, Dyson fan has saved our marriage. My husband has it on his side of the bed and I don't have it on mine." So they can keep their different temperatures. Of course, separate duvets and all that sort of stuff. Don't clock watch. It's very interesting. If you have an illuminated dial on your clock, if you wake up, and it's perfectly fine and normal to wake up, and most of us do, and then fall back to sleep again without actually realizing we've woken up. If we're anxious or stressed, we will think, "Oh my God," we'll look at the alarm and say, "Oh, it's 2 hours before the alarm clock goes off. I might as well sort of get up, start doing emails and drinking coffee." Now, that's not what you want. You want to stay calm, stay relaxed, and get that extra couple of hours. We've talked about don't taking your apps too seriously. Keep a routine, both free days and work days. Some people define the sleeping space with a particular smell. So lavender or whatever it is, because then you go into that space and it reinforces, this is where I relax, this is my sleeping space, and you associate the smell with that particular behavior. Doesn't work for everybody. Now, this is something I raised a few years ago and has really caught on, because I said that, look, if your partner snores and you can't deal with earplugs, then it is not at all a reflection on the quality of your relationship if you're sleeping in separate spaces. Of course, that's what the aristocrats did all the time. So it's been called, and I really don't like the term, sleep divorce. It isn't a divorce. It's certainly sleeping in separate spaces so you both get the sleep that you need. And so then you will have all of those, you will be more empathetic. You will have a better sense of humor. You will be more engaged in the time that you have with your partner. So, that I think is quite important. And I really, as I say, don't like sleep divorce as a term, but I do think sleeping in separate spaces is a perfectly normal and viable thing to do if it works for your particular relationship. And then the final thing is, and we touched on this, if you wake up, don't get stressed out. It's very likely that the default human sleep pattern is not this so-called perfect, continuous 8 hours of sleep, but what's called biphasic or polyphasic sleep. You go to sleep, you wake up, you then go to sleep again. And waking up in the middle of the night is perfectly normal. That's what many societies do. That's what most animals do. And it's that business of not thinking, "Oh my God, that's the end of sleep. I might as well abandon sleep and do something else." So again, it's so much about staying calm and doing, if you wake up and you feel as though you're not getting back to sleep quickly, and we all have our various ways of doing that. I have a wonderful BBC app which I can listen to plays or stories or whatever, and I'm usually fast asleep again in 5 minutes. So it's whatever works for you. But it is about winding down and relaxing, and I can't say it enough, which is most people don't have a sleep issue. It's stress and anxiety, and it's getting that under control, which is the key to really healthy sleep.
I mean, it's so true. When I was diagnosed with insomnia was right when I burnt out. And it's really hard for me when I'm asked the question, did you burn out first or were you an insomniac first? Well, one fueled the other, really.
Yeah.
It's years of insomnia that drove my burnout, but it's also because I was burning out and building so many hours and working around the clock that I ended up being an insomniac. So it's really hard to know which one started which. But what I know for certain is that they co-created a monster.
Well, that's exactly right. Because, of course, you don't get the sleep you need. You are aware you're functioning below par. That means, you have this sort of anxiety about not functioning, which can then form into depression, and relationships can start to fall apart. And so all of that sort of loop can become massively exaggerated. It's all about trying to chill, wind down, and not get anxious about it.
This is what actually led me to clinical hypnotherapy, because I worked with a hypnotherapist when
Yeah.
I struggled with my sleep, and I found it so transformative that I wanted to use that tool for myself, but also for clients struggling with their sleep. Is that something you've experienced? I'm just curious.
I haven't experienced it directly, but I know people like yourself who have used it. I haven't used it. My sleep is broadly okay, and it always has been kind of okay. But I think if it works for you, then go for it. I mean, absolutely embrace it. It's as I say, sleep is highly dynamic, very variable. It changes as we age. It changes depending upon life experiences. And if hypnotherapy works, just grab it, hug it to you, and use it.
Well, now, of course, the thing that comes to my mind as we're about to say goodbyes, though, is I would love to come to your lab and test this hypnotherapy real life. You will have to put up with the fact that I am a Cambridge girl, not an Oxford one. So
Well,
maybe we start a war. But if you would forgive me for that, then perhaps we could collaborate.
Yeah, no, that sounds. I mean, one of my the thing that I'm so excited about is before I came to Oxford, there was no sleep, there was no circadian rhythms, and in the past 20 years, we've now built the Sleep and Circadian, Sir Jules Thorne Sleep and Circadian Neuroscience Institute. We've got people like Simon Kyle, who I was able to hire, working on the very practical end, and what he's doing is teaching sleep techniques to nurse practitioners in GP clinics, so we can get the message out and try and take some of the load off of the really busy doctors. And we're doing the fundamental stuff, including drug discovery. It's so exciting, and I think that hypnotherapy is an exciting new dimension.
Well, there we go. We have part 2 all planned out. I'll be heading to Oxford. Russell, I just want to take a moment to thank you. It was incredibly insightful, and it was a true honor to have the opportunity to pick your extraordinary brain on the topic of sleep. I'm so grateful. And if there is one place you would like to leave our listener to be directed to connect with you and to your world and your research and your lab, where might that be?
Well, the book I wrote fairly recently called Lifetime, and that's published in different languages and is all over the world. That, I think, crystallizes many of the discussions we've been having. And I wrote it because I wanted to inform people about the extraordinary science that has emerged over the past few years, and then how we could use this individually to change, improve the sleep that we get. And that can dig in to quite a bit of detail. And there's some important issues there. I mean, we haven't had a chance to talk about them in this program, but duty of care by employers for their employees. What can we do? So we know that people who don't get enough sleep have high rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity. What kind of food do we provide for those individuals? It's vending machines full of high fat, high sugar. And so there's lots of stuff we can do in the workspace to actually mitigate some of the problems endemic with shortened sleep.
Thank you so much. I really would love to have that conversation. My litigator hat is now being activated. So when you're bringing on those conversations, I feel like this is definitely a call for another conversation. And
Excellent.
In the meantime, I will add the link to your book to the show notes so that everyone can go ahead and read on that topic. Thank you ever so much.
Thank
and
you.
See you in Oxford.
Indeed. It's been a great pleasure. Lovely to meet you, Johnny.